Master Chen walked through the bustling streets of the ancient city, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 62 years old, he had spent most of his life perfecting the art of karate. His small dojo on the outskirts of town was known throughout the region, not for its size or grandeur, but for the wisdom and skill of its master. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone path as Chen made his way to the local market. He needed rice and vegetables for the simple meal he would share with his 3 students later that evening. His life had become routine over the years, teaching, training, and living simply. He had no family of his own, having dedicated his entire existence to the martial arts. As he approached the market square, Chen noticed an unusual commotion. A crowd had gathered near the fountain at the center of the plaza. Voices were raised, and he could hear the unmistakable sound of distress. His instincts, honed by decades of training, told him that something was wrong. Moving closer, Chen saw a young woman on her knees, tears streaming down her face. She was pleading with 3 men in elaborate uniforms, royal guards from the palace. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, and their weapons hung prominently at their sides. These were not ordinary soldiers, but elite warriors who served the king directly. "Please, sir," the woman begged. "My husband is dying. The medicine costs only 5 gold coins. I have 4, and I promise to bring the 5th tomorrow. Please just let me take it now." The tallest of the 3 guards, a man with a cruel scar running down his left cheek, laughed coldly. "Rules are rules, peasant. 5 coins or nothing. The royal decree states that all transactions must be completed in full at the time of purchase." Chen watched as the woman pulled out a small cloth bag, emptying its contents into her palm. 4 gold coins glinted in the sunlight. It was likely everything she owned in the world. The guard with the scar kicked the coins from her hand, sending them scattering across the stone ground. "Clean up this mess and get out of here," the guard sneered. "You're disturbing the peace." The crowd that had gathered remained silent. Everyone knew that challenging the royal guards meant risking imprisonment or worse. The king's men were known for their harsh treatment of those who dared to question their authority. Chen felt his jaw tighten as he watched the scene unfold. Throughout his life, he had always believed that true strength should be used to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The martial arts he had studied and taught were not just about physical technique, but about honor, compassion, and justice. The woman scrambled on her hands and knees, collecting her scattered coins while the guards stood over her, laughing among themselves. The second guard, younger than the first, but equally arrogant, placed his boot on one of the coins just as the woman reached for it. "Maybe you should have thought about your husband's health before spending your money on pretty dresses," he taunted, gesturing to the woman's simple, worn clothing that was clearly anything but expensive. Something inside Chen snapped. He had witnessed countless injustices in his lifetime, but there was something about this particular cruelty that he could not ignore. Perhaps it was the woman's genuine desperation, or maybe it was the guard's obvious enjoyment of her suffering. Whatever it was, Chen knew he could not simply walk away. Stepping forward from the crowd, Chen's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "That's enough." The 3 guards turned to look at the old man who had dared to speak. Chen stood straight and tall, his simple gray clothes and weathered appearance making him seem unremarkable compared to their polished armor and weapons. The scarred guard smiled menacingly. "Old man, I suggest you keep walking unless you want to join this woman on the ground." Chen moved with the fluid grace that comes from a lifetime of training. In one smooth motion, he knelt down and picked up the 4 scattered coins, placing them gently in the woman's hands. Then he reached into his own small purse and produced a 5th coin, adding it to her collection. "There," he said softly to the woman. "Now you have enough for your husband's medicine." The guards were stunned by the old man's boldness. No one had ever dared to interfere with their business so directly. The scarred leader's face flushed with anger as he stepped toward Chen. "You have made a serious mistake, old fool. That woman was being punished for disturbing the peace. By helping her, you have defied the king's justice." Chen stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. "I have defied nothing but cruelty. Justice would be helping a woman save her husband's life, not kicking coins from her desperate hands." The crowd held its breath as the tension in the air became thick enough to cut. Everyone knew that the situation was about to escalate far beyond a simple disagreement. The royal guards had a reputation for violence, and they had never been challenged so openly in public. The youngest of the three guards, barely more than a boy, despite his imposing uniform, whispered urgently to his companions, "Maybe we should just let this go." The old man paid for the medicine. No harm done. But the scarred leader was beyond reason now. His authority had been questioned in front of dozens of witnesses. If word got back to the palace that a simple peasant had made him look weak, his position would be in jeopardy. "Arrest him," he commanded his companions. "This old man will learn what happens to those who interfere with royal business." As the three guards moved to surround Chen, the karate master felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down. His breathing became deeper and more controlled. His muscles, despite his age, began to respond with the memory of thousands of hours of training and meditation. The woman clutched her 5 coins and looked up at Chen with gratitude and terror. She wanted to thank him for his kindness, but she also feared what his intervention might cost him. The royal guards were known for their brutal efficiency in dealing with troublemakers. The scarred guard reached out to grab Chen's arm, confident that subduing an elderly man would be a simple task. His fingers had barely touched the karate master's sleeve when everything changed. Chen's response was swift and precise. Using a basic Aikido technique, he redirected the guard's momentum, causing the large man to stumble forward. Before the guard could regain his balance, Chen delivered a perfectly controlled strike to a pressure point on his shoulder. Temporarily numbing his right arm, the crowd gasped as they watched the old man move with surprising speed and grace. The guard staggered backward, clutching his shoulder in confusion and pain. He had never experienced anything like it before. "What did you do to me?" the scarred guard demanded, flexing his fingers as feeling slowly returned to his arm. Chen maintained his calm demeanor. "I simply defended myself." "You are free to walk away, and no one else needs to be hurt." The second guard, the arrogant young man who had stepped on the woman's coin, drew his sword partially from its sheath. "You think your peasant tricks will work against trained warriors?" But the third guard, the youngest of the three, seemed genuinely troubled by what he had witnessed. He had been trained to fight with weapons and brute force, but the old man's movements were unlike anything he had ever seen. There was a fluidity and control that spoke of years of dedicated practice. Chen noticed the young guard's hesitation and spoke directly to him. "You seem different from your companions. You don't have to be part of this." The young guard's name was Marcus, and he had only recently been assigned to this unit. Unlike his more experienced partners, he had not yet become completely hardened by the absolute power that came with serving the king. He had joined the royal guard because he wanted to serve justice, not to bully innocent people, sir, Marcus said quietly to the scarred leader. "Perhaps we should report this incident to our captain and let him decide how to handle it." The scarred guard, whose name was Captain Voss, turned on Marcus with fury. "Are you questioning my judgment, soldier? This old man assaulted a royal guard. The punishment is immediate imprisonment, possibly worse." Chen watched the dynamics between the three men with interest. He could see that Marcus was uncomfortable with the situation, while the second guard seemed eager for violence. Captain Voss was clearly driven by wounded pride and the need to reassert his authority. The woman who had been collecting coins stood up slowly, still clutching the money that would save her husband's life. She looked at Chen with tears in her eyes. "Sir, please don't fight them because of me. Take your coin back and go. I'll find another way to help my husband." Chen smiled gently at her. "Keep the money and go get the medicine your husband needs. This situation is no longer about you." As the woman hurried away, disappearing into the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation, Chen turned his full attention back to the three guards. He could see that Captain Voss was becoming increasingly agitated, while the second guard was growing more eager for conflict. "I'll give you one more chance to walk away," Chen said calmly. "There's no need for anyone to get seriously hurt." Captain Voss laughed bitterly. "Hurt, old man. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've fought in 3 wars and defeated dozens of enemies in single combat. You may have surprised me once, but it won't happen again." The captain drew his sword fully. the polished steel gleaming in the sunlight. The sound of metal scraping against leather caused several people in the crowd to step backward. Everyone knew that when royal guards drew their weapons, serious injury or death usually followed. Chen sighed deeply. He had hoped to resolve the situation peacefully, but it was becoming clear that Captain Voss would not be satisfied until he had restored his damaged reputation. Through violence, the second guard also drew his weapon. A wicked-looking curved blade that he wielded with obvious familiarity. Only Marcus remained with his sword sheathed, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. 2 against 1 seems hardly fair, Chen observed. Are you certain this is the path you want to choose? Captain Voss raised his sword and took a fighting stance. Fair? You should have considered fairness before you decided to interfere with royal business. The crowd formed a wider circle around the combatants. Some people were trying to leave, not wanting to witness what they assumed would be the brutal defeat of the elderly karate master. Others remained, fascinated by the old man's calm confidence in the face of armed opponents. Chen closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself the way he had been taught decades earlier. When he opened them again, there was a subtle but unmistakable change in his bearing. The relaxed, grandfatherly demeanor was still there, but underneath it was something much more dangerous. Captain Voss attacked first, bringing his sword down in a powerful overhead strike that should have split Chen's skull. But the karate master was no longer where the blade was aimed. Using footwork that seemed almost like dancing, Chen moved aside at the last possible second. The captain's sword struck the stone ground with tremendous force, sending sparks flying. Before he could recover and raise his weapon again, Chen stepped inside his guard and delivered a precise palm strike to his solar plexus. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Captain Voss doubled over, gasping for air as his diaphragm spasmed. His sword clattered to the ground as he struggled to breathe normally. The second guard, seeing his captain in distress, rushed at Chen from the side. His curved blade whistled through the air in a horizontal sweep designed to decapitate the old man. Chen ducked under the blade and swept his leg in a perfect arc, catching the guard's ankle and sending him tumbling to the ground. As the guard fell, Chen gently but firmly struck a nerve cluster in his neck, causing him to lose consciousness instantly. The entire exchange had taken less than 10 seconds. Marcus stood frozen, watching his 2 companions lying on the ground. Captain Voss was slowly regaining his ability to breathe, while the other guard remained unconscious but clearly alive. The old man had defeated 2 armed, trained warriors without sustaining so much as a scratch. Chen turned to Marcus with the same gentle expression he had worn throughout the encounter. As I said, you don't have to be part of this. Your friends will recover fully in a few minutes. Perhaps this would be a good time for all of you to reconsider how you treat the people you're supposed to protect. Marcus looked down at his fallen companions, then back at the remarkable old man who had just accomplished the impossible. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but he made no move to draw it. Who are you? Marcus asked quietly. Chen looked at Marcus with kind eyes, seeing something in the young guard that reminded him of his younger self. I am simply a teacher, nothing more. My name is Chen, and I run a small dojo outside the city walls. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing to process what he had just witnessed. In all his training at the Royal Academy, he had never seen techniques like those Chen had used. The old man had moved with a combination of power and precision that seemed almost supernatural. Captain, Voss was beginning to recover, pulling himself up to a sitting position while still struggling to catch his breath. His face was red with both exertion and embarrassment. Never in his 15 years as a royal guard had he been defeated so icily, especially by an unarmed opponent. The unconscious guard began to stir, groaning softly as consciousness returned. Chen knelt beside him, checking his pulse and ensuring that no permanent damage had been done. His touch was gentle, almost medicinal, showing genuine concern for the man he had just defeated. He'll be fine, Chen assured Marcus. The pressure point technique I used will leave him with nothing more than a mild headache. Your captain may have some soreness in his chest for a day or 2, but there will be no lasting effects. Marcus found himself in an impossible situation. According to military protocol, he should arrest Chen immediately for assaulting royal guards. But how could he justify attacking an old man who had shown such restraint and compassion even toward his enemies? "Master Chen," Marcus said carefully, "you realize that I'm supposed to take you into custody? What you've done here today, regardless of your motives, is considered treason against the crown." Chen stood up and brushed dust from his simple clothes. "I understand your position, young man. You have duties and obligations to fulfill. But tell me, what does your conscience say about what happened here today?" Before Marcus could answer, Captain Voss had recovered enough to speak. His voice was hoarse and filled with rage. "Marcus, arrest this man immediately. He is a dangerous criminal who assaulted officers of the king." The crowd that had witnessed the entire confrontation began to murmur among themselves. Many of them had seen the initial incident with the desperate woman and knew that Chen had acted out of compassion rather than malice. An elderly merchant stepped forward from the crowd. "Captain, with all due respect, we all saw what happened here. The master only defended himself after you drew weapons on him. He even showed mercy to your men." Other voices from the crowd began to echo similar sentiments. Chen had become something of a folk hero in the span of a few minutes. The people had rarely seen anyone stand up to the royal guard's abuse of power, and they were clearly inspired by his actions. Captain Voss struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but determined to reassert his authority. "Silence. All of you. Any citizen who continues to interfere will also face arrest." But his threats rang hollow now. The crowd had seen him defeated by an elderly man, and his authority had been significantly diminished. Some people were even beginning to laugh quietly among themselves. Chen sensed the delicate nature of the situation. He knew that if Captain Voss lost face completely, the man might become desperate enough to do something truly dangerous. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent was one who had nothing left to lose. Captain Chen said respectfully, "You fought bravely. Your techniques are solid, and your dedication to your duty is clear. Perhaps we could consider this matter resolved." No one was seriously injured, and justice was ultimately served. It was a graceful way for Captain Voss to save face. But the scarred guard was too proud and too angry to accept it. His humiliation had been witnessed by dozens of people, and word would spread throughout the city within hours. His reputation was ruined unless he could somehow redeem himself. "This is far from over, old man," Captain Voss snarled. "You may have caught us off guard today, but I promise you this. Before the sun sets tomorrow, you will be in chains in the deepest dungeon of the royal palace." Chen nodded calmly. "If that is your choice, then I will not resist when you come for me. You know where to find me?" Marcus watched this exchange with growing unease. He could see that his captain was making a serious mistake, driven by wounded pride rather than justice. The old man had offered a peaceful resolution, but Captain Voss was too stubborn to accept it. Sir Marcus said quietly to his captain, "Perhaps we should report this incident to Commander Harrison and let him decide how to proceed." Captain Voss whirled on Marcus with fury. "Are you questioning my judgment again, soldier? I am in command here, and I will handle this situation as I see fit." The second guard had fully regained consciousness and was sitting up, looking dazed and confused. He touched his neck where Chen had struck him, wincing at the tenderness he found there. "What happened?" he asked groggily. "The last thing I remember was charging at the old man with my sword." "You were defeated," Captain Voss said bitterly. "We all were, by this elderly peasant who thinks he can challenge the authority of the king." Chen began to walk away from the scene, moving slowly and deliberately. He had accomplished what he set out to do. The woman had gotten the money she needed for her husband's medicine, and no one had been seriously injured. In his mind, the matter was closed. "Where do you think you're going?" Captain Voss called after him. Chen turned back with a patient smile. "Home, Captain. I have students arriving for their evening lesson, and I don't want to keep them waiting. If you wish to continue this discussion, you know where to find me." As Chen disappeared into the crowd, Marcus found himself facing a difficult decision. He could follow his captain's orders and pursue the old man, or he could listen to his conscience and try to prevent what he sensed would be a tragic escalation of the conflict. The crowd began to disperse, but the buzz of conversation was intense. Word of the karate master's incredible display would spread throughout the city like wildfire. By evening, the story would be told in every tavern and marketplace. Growing more elaborate with each telling, Captain Voss retrieved his sword from the ground, his face dark with determination. "Marcus, help Rodriguez to his feet. We're returning to the palace immediately. I have a report to make to the commander, and then we're going to gather reinforcements." Marcus knew that his captain was about to make a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. But as a junior guard, his options were limited. He could only hope that wiser heads would prevail when they reached the palace. As the three guards made their way back through the city streets, none of them realized that their encounter with Master Chen was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change not only their own lives, but the entire kingdom. Master Chen arrived at his small dojo just as the sun was beginning to set. The simple wooden building sat quietly among a grove of cherry trees, its modest appearance belying the decades of wisdom contained within its walls. As he approached the entrance, he could see his three students waiting for him in the courtyard. Sarah, his youngest student at 16, was practicing her forms with the dedication that had impressed him since her first day. Her movements were becoming more fluid with each passing week. Though she still had much to learn about the deeper aspects of martial arts, David, 22 and the most physically gifted of his students, was working on his kicks against a wooden post. His technique was nearly perfect from a mechanical standpoint. But Chen often worried that the young man focused too much on power and not enough on control and wisdom. The third student, Alina, was 35 and had come to Chen seeking peace rather than combat skills. She had lost her husband in the recent border conflicts and found solace in the meditative aspects of karate training. Her movements were gentle, but precise, reflecting her understanding that martial arts could be as much about healing as fighting. "Master Chen," Sarah called out as she saw him approaching, "You're later than usual." We were starting to worry. Chen smiled as he removed his simple sandals at the entrance to the dojo. "I apologize for the delay. I encountered a situation in the city that required my attention." David paused in his training, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What kind of situation, Master? You look troubled." Chen considered how much to tell his students about the day's events. He had always taught them that martial arts should be used only in defense of others, or when all peaceful options had been exhausted. Today's incident at the market would serve as a perfect example of these principles. "I witnessed an injustice in the market square," Chen began, settling into his customary position at the front of the dojo. "A woman needed medicine for her dying husband, but the royal guards were preventing her from purchasing it despite having nearly enough money. Alina stopped her practice and joined the others in sitting before their master. She had experienced firsthand the arbitrary cruelty of those in power and could easily imagine the scene Chen described. "What did you do, Master?" she asked quietly. "I provided the additional coin she needed and spoke against the guards' treatment of her. Unfortunately, they viewed my intervention as a challenge to their authority." David's eyes lit up with excitement. "Did you fight them, Master?" "We've been training for years, but none of us have ever seen you actually use your skills in real combat." Chen nodded slowly. "Yes, David, I was forced to defend myself. 3 royal guards with weapons attacked me, and I had no choice but to stop them." The students exchanged amazed glances. They had always known their master was skilled, but hearing that he had faced 3 armed opponents was almost beyond belief. "Were you hurt?" Sarah asked with concern. "No, child. I was not injured. More importantly, neither were they. I used only the minimum force necessary to end the conflict. This is the most important lesson of today's events. True strength is knowing when not to use your power." Alina understood the deeper implications immediately. "But Master, the royal guards won't simply forget about this incident. They'll view it as a humiliation that must be avenged." Chun's expression became more serious. "You're quite right, Alina. I fear that my actions today may have consequences that extend far beyond the original incident. The captain of the guards is a proud man who will not accept defeat gracefully." David's excitement was replaced by concern for his teacher's safety. "Master, maybe you should leave the city for a while. Let things calm down before you return. Running away would solve nothing." David, It would only confirm their belief that I am a criminal who fears justice. Besides, I have responsibilities here. I have students who depend on me, and this dojo has been my home for over 20 years, as if summoned by their conversation about the royal guards. The sound of approaching horses could be heard outside the dojo. The rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone grew louder as multiple riders approached the grove of cherry trees. Chen rose smoothly to his feet, his senses alert, but his demeanor calm. It seems our discussion of consequences was more timely than I expected. The students also stood, instinctively moving closer to their master. Through the open doorway of the dojo, they could see torches flickering between the trees as the riders drew nearer. Master Sarah whispered, "There are a lot of them." Chen could count at least 8 mounted figures approaching through the gathering darkness. This was no simple arrest party. It was a show of force designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Captain Voss's voice boomed through the evening air as the riders entered the courtyard. "Chen of the Mountain Dojo, by order of Commander Harrison of the Royal Guard. You are under arrest for assault on royal officers and sedition against the crown." Chen walked calmly to the doorway, where he could see the full scope of the force arrayed against him. In addition to Captain Voss and his 2 companions from the market, there were 5 additional guards, all mounted and heavily armed. Their armor gleamed in the torchlight, and their weapons were clearly displayed. "Good evening, Captain," Chen said pleasantly. "I see you've brought friends." Captain Voss dismounted, his hand resting on his sword hilt. The humiliation he had suffered earlier in the day had been eating at him for hours, and he was determined to redeem himself. "This time, old man, there will be no surprises. You are outnumbered and surrounded. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to military law. Resist, and we will use whatever." The tension in the courtyard was thick enough to cut as Captain Voss held his sword pointed at his own subordinates. Marcus and Sergeant Blake stood firm in their defiance, while the other guards looked on in shock at the unprecedented breakdown of military. Disciplined Tun recognized that this was the critical moment. If he acted now, he might be able to prevent a tragedy that would destroy multiple lives. But his intervention would require him to reveal skills and knowledge that he had kept hidden for decades. "Captain Voss," Chen said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, "look at what you're doing. You're threatening to harm your own men because they want to protect innocent civilians. Is this truly the justice you serve?" But Captain Voss was beyond reason now. The combination of humiliation, rage, and absolute authority had created a dangerous mental state where he could justify any action as necessary for maintaining order. "Silence," he screamed at Chen. "You caused this. Your interference has turned my own men against me." As Captain Voss raised his sword toward Marcus, something extraordinary happened. Chen moved with a speed that seemed to bend the laws of physics. One moment he was standing several yards away with his hands visible, and the next he was directly behind Captain Voss, his hand resting gently on the man's wrist. "Lower your weapon, Captain," Chen said softly. "This is not the way." Captain Voss spun around, trying to bring his sword to bear on Chen, but found that his arm wouldn't respond properly. Chen had applied pressure to a specific nerve point that temporarily interfered with motor control, without causing permanent damage. "What did you do to me?" Captain Voss demanded, staring at his unresponsive sword arm. "I prevented you from making a mistake that would haunt you for the rest of your life," Chen replied calmly. "Your arm will recover its function in a few minutes. Use that time to think clearly about what you really want to accomplish here." The other guards were stunned by what they had witnessed. Chen had moved so quickly that several of them weren't even sure how he had gotten behind their captain. The display of skill was far beyond anything they had been trained to expect from a civilian. Marcus took advantage of the momentary confusion to address his fellow guards directly. "Brothers, we all took the same oath when we joined the Royal Guard. We swore to protect the innocent and serve justice. Look around you. Do you see any criminals here? Or do you see an old teacher and his students who want nothing more than to be left in peace?" Sergeant Blake nodded in agreement. "Marcus is right. This operation has lost all connection to justice. We're acting like bandits, not guardians of the law." Two of the younger guards dismounted and moved to stand with Marcus and Blake. They had been uncomfortable at the operation from the beginning, but had lacked the courage to speak up until now. "Captain?" Voss watched his authority crumble as more of his men defied his orders. The sword fell from his nerveless fingers as feeling slowly returned to his arm. His face was a mask of rage and desperation, as he realized that his career was likely over regardless of what happened. Next, Chen addressed the entire group of guards. With the same patient tone he used when teaching his students, "Gentlemen, you all have a choice to make tonight. You can continue down a path that leads to violence and injustice, or you can choose to be the protectors you originally set out to become." One of the guards who had remained mounted, a young man named Thomas, spoke up hesitantly. "Master Chen, with respect, you did assault royal guards in front of dozens of witnesses. We can't just ignore that." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right, Thomas. I did use force against your colleagues. But tell me, what would you have done if you had seen a desperate woman being denied the means to save her husband's life? Would you have walked away and done nothing?" The question hung in the air as each of the guards considered their own answer. Most of them had joined the royal guard with noble intentions, but years of following orders without question had gradually eroded their connection to their original ideals. Alina emerged from the dojo, moving slowly and keeping her hands visible. "May I speak?" she asked politely. Marcus nodded. "Of course, ma'am. My husband died fighting for this kingdom in the border wars," Alina said quietly. "He believed he was protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. When I look at Master Chen, I see someone carrying on that same mission. When I look at some of you, I see the same noble spirit. But when I look at your captain, I see only a man consumed by pride and anger." Her words struck home with several of the guards. Many of them had friends or family members who had died in the recent conflicts, and they understood the sacrifice that Elena's husband had made. "Captain," Voss had recovered enough function in his arm to pick up his sword, but the fire seemed to have gone out of him. He could see that he had lost the loyalty of his men, and without their support, his position was untenable. "This isn't over," he said weakly. But the threat lacked conviction. Chen stepped closer to Captain Voss, his expression filled with genuine compassion rather than victory. "Captain, it doesn't have to be this way. You're clearly a man of strong convictions and considerable skill. Those are admirable qualities when properly directed. But pride and anger are poison that will destroy everything good about you if you let them." For a moment, something flickered in Captain Voss's eyes that suggested he was truly hearing Chen's words. But then his defensive walls went back up, and his face hardened once again. "Save your philosophy for your students, old man. I have my duties, and I will fulfill them, regardless of the cost." Marcus realized that Captain Voss was never going to change his mind through reason alone. The man's identity was too closely tied to his authority for him to admit that he had been wrong. But there was still a chance to prevent further tragedy. Captain Marcus said formally, "I hereby request that you allow me to file a full report of tonight's events to Commander Harrison. Let him decide how to proceed with this situation." It was a diplomatic way of removing Captain Voss from command without openly challenging his authority. The other guards immediately understood what Marcus was suggesting and voiced their agreement. "Sergeant." Blake stepped forward to support Marcus's proposal. "That's the proper protocol. Voss, we should let the commander make the decision about how to handle this." Captain Voss looked around at his men, realizing that he had been effectively relieved of command through their collective action. His authority had not been openly challenged, but it had been quietly transferred to Marcus and Blake. "Fine," he said bitterly. "We return to the palace immediately. But mark my words, this matter is far from resolved." As the guards began to remount their horses, Chen called out to them. "Marcus, Blake, all of you, thank you for choosing to serve true justice tonight. Your kingdom is fortunate to have protectors like you." The young guard Thomas rode closer to Chen before departing. "Master, what you did today in the market square, and here tonight, it will be remembered. Sometimes people need to see that it's possible to stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible." As the guards rode away into the darkness, Chen's students gathered around him. They had witnessed something extraordinary, not just their master's incredible martial arts skills, but his ability to transform a potentially deadly confrontation into a lesson about honor and justice. 3 days after the confrontation at the dojo, Chen was working in his small garden when a messenger arrived on horseback. The young man wore the colors of the royal palace, but his demeanor was respectful rather than threatening. "Master Chen," the messenger called out as he dismounted, "bring word from Commander Harrison. He requests your presence at the palace for an audience with King Edmund himself." Chen set down his gardening tools and wiped his hands on a cloth. He had been expecting some form of official response to recent events, but a direct summons from the king was more significant than he had anticipated. "When does His Majesty wish to see me?" Chen asked calmly. "Immediately, if you please, master. I have been instructed to escort you personally and to ensure your safety during the journey." As they rode toward the palace, Chen reflected on how dramatically his quiet life had changed in just a few days. Word of his encounters with the royal guards had spread throughout the kingdom like wildfire. Some people hailed him as a hero who had stood up against tyranny, while others viewed him as a dangerous rebel who threatened the established order. The palace was even more magnificent than Chen had imagined. Towering spires reached toward the sky, and elaborate gardens showcased the kingdom's wealth and power. Guards in pristine uniforms stood at attention as they passed, but Chen noticed that their expressions were curious rather than hostile. Commander Harrison met them at the palace entrance. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Unlike Captain Voss, this was clearly a leader who commanded respect through competence rather than fear. "Master Chen," the commander said with a respectful bow, "thank you for coming. His Majesty is most eager to meet the man who has caused such a stir in our kingdom." As they walked through the ornate corridors of the palace, Commander Harrison spoke quietly to Chen. "I want you to know that I have conducted a thorough investigation. Your actions, while technically in violation of certain laws, appear to have been motivated by compassion and a desire for justice." Chen nodded but remained silent. He sensed that the commander had more to say. "Captain Voss has been relieved of his command pending a full review of his conduct," Harrison continued. "The young guard Marcus has been promoted to sergeant, and Sergeant Blake has been commended for his leadership during a difficult situation." They arrived at the throne room, a vast chamber with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns on the marble floor. King Edmund sat on an impressive throne, but when he saw Chen approaching, he stood and stepped down to meet him at ground level. The king was younger than Chen had expected, perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and a bearing that suggested both authority and wisdom. This was not the tyrant that some of the kingdom's critics described, but a man who seemed genuinely concerned with the welfare of his people. "Master Chen," the king said warmly, "I have heard remarkable things about you. Please, sit with me so we can speak as equals." They settled into comfortable chairs near a large window overlooking the palace gardens. The informal setting was clearly intended to put Chen at ease and encourage honest conversation. "Your Majesty," Chen began, "I want you to know that I harbor no ill will toward your guards or your government. My actions were prompted by a specific situation that I felt required immediate intervention." King Edmund smiled. "Master Chen, I appreciate your directness, but before we discuss recent events, I must confess something to you. The woman you helped in the market square, her name is Maria, and her husband is one of my personal servants. I have known them both for years." Chen's eyes widened slightly in surprise. This was an unexpected revelation. The king continued. "When I learned what had happened, I was deeply troubled. Not just by the cruelty shown by my guards, but by the fact that one of my loyal servants was suffering while I remained unaware of his plight. Your Majesty, you cannot be expected to know every detail of your subjects' lives. The important thing is how you respond when injustices come to your attention." King Edmund nodded thoughtfully. "Wise words, Master Chen, and that brings me to why I asked you here today. Your actions have forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about how power is wielded in my kingdom." The king stood and walked to the window. gazing out at his realm. I became king at a young age when my father died unexpectedly. In the early years, I relied heavily on advisors and established protocols to guide my decisions. Over time, I fear that some of those protocols have become disconnected from their original purpose of serving justice. Chen joined the king at the window. Power is a tool, Your Majesty. Like any tool, its value depends entirely on how it is used. The question is not whether you have made mistakes in the past, but whether you are willing to learn from them and do better in the future. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. The king replied, Master Chen, I have a proposition for you. I would like you to serve as an advisor to me, helping to reform how justice is administered in our kingdom. Your perspective as someone outside the traditional power structure could be invaluable. Chen considered the offer carefully. He had never sought political power or influence, preferring the simple life of a teacher, but he could see the genuine sincerity in the king's proposal. And the opportunity to create positive change for thousands of people was not something he could ignore lightly. Your Majesty, I am honored by your trust, but I must ask, what would happen to Captain Voss? His actions were wrong, but they came from a wounded heart rather than an evil one. True justice should include the possibility of redemption. The king's respect for Chen increased even more at this question. Here was a man who had been threatened and attacked by Captain Voss, yet was still concerned about his enemy's welfare. I had hoped you would ask about him, the king said. I believe Captain Voss could benefit from learning a different approach to leadership and justice. Would you be willing to work with him as well as with me? Chen smiled for the first time since entering the palace. Your Majesty, I believe that would be the beginning of something truly remarkable. 6 months later, the kingdom had indeed been transformed. Chen's influence had led to reforms in how justice was administered. With an emphasis on compassion and rehabilitation rather than pure punishment, Captain Voss, after months of difficult soul-searching and training with Chen, had become one of the most respected leaders in the royal guard. Marcus had been promoted to captain and was now responsible for training new recruits in the principles of true service. The woman Maria's husband had recovered fully, and she had become an advocate for other families facing medical crises. But perhaps most importantly, Chen had discovered that his greatest impact came not from his martial arts skills, but from his ability to see the potential for good in every person he encountered. The kingdom had learned that true strength came not from the power to dominate others, but from the wisdom to lift them up. As Chen sat in his garden one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him to this point. A simple act of compassion in a market square had somehow led to the transformation of an entire kingdom. His students, Sarah, David, and Alina, approached him, their faces glowing with pride for their master and excitement about the future. They had all grown tremendously during the months of change, not just in their martial arts skills, but in their understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. Master, Sarah said, do you ever regret getting involved that day in the market? Chen looked at his students, then at the peaceful village beyond his garden, and finally at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Regret helping someone in need? Never, child. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are not against enemies, but against the indifference that allows suffering to continue when we have the power to stop it. As the night settled around them, master and students continued their quiet conversation about courage, compassion, and the responsibility that comes with strength. The karate master's greatest lesson had been learned not through combat, but through the discovery that true victory comes from transforming enemies into allies and building a world where justice serves everyone, regardless of their station in life. The unforeseen twist had not been a surprise attack or a hidden enemy, but the realization that sometimes the most powerful technique a martial artist can master is knowing when to extend a hand in friendship rather than strike with a fist in anger,